Is there a reason to fear UFOs in our skies, and do they have a nefarious agenda, and if so, what is that agenda? Or, as some have suggested, are there multiple alien species visiting us with differing agendas, some peaceful and some hostile? Is there a hostile purpose behind alien abductions? Are devices being implanted into people for the purposes of tracking them, or even worse, for the purpose of creating sleeper soldiers who at a moment's notice can serve a hostile alien agenda? My guest tonight, Rob Shelsky, has done countless research on the subject and believes aliens are not our space brothers and have hostile intent towards us. He is joining me tonight to talk about the deadly and harmful aspects of UFOs. Greetings and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and so great to be back here once again. Really having a great time doing the show, and just like so many other guests, I've got another great guest joining me tonight. He is a repeat guest. His name is Rob Shelsky, and Rob is a prolific fiction and nonfiction writer and researcher. He's written several books on the paranormal and on the UFO topics. He's also a former MUFON field investigator. And he's going to be joining me tonight to talk about what he believes are the deadly and harmful effects of UFOs, based on his 2015 book, Deadly UFOs and the Disappeared. So great to have you, Rob, join me once again. He joined me in early 2019 to talk about the Mandela effect and his research into that. But it's great to have Rob on. He's a great researcher. And I really think you're going to enjoy tonight's show. If you haven't been to the Facebook page, please head over there and visit the page. It's at facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal, and like and follow us there. I've also created a new Facebook group. It's the Passion for the Paranormal Facebook group. If you're into sharing and exchanging ideas about the paranormal and all aspects of the paranormal, please join us on that Facebook group and get into some of the discussions there. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/passion, the number 4, the para, that's P-A-R-A. If you haven't been over to the website, give us a visit there as well. You can catch up with past episodes there. You can access links to books from past guests. And you can even blog about past episodes. Now, I mentioned this before, but I've got an upcoming Halloween episode where I'm going to have a special guest joining me. We're going to be sharing ghost stories from others and some of our own stories. It's going to be a lot of fun. This is the first ever episode where we're going to be talking about ghost stories, so I'm really looking forward to that one. And I hope you'll join us for that. If you have a story you'd like to share, please share it on the website, or you can email it to me at passion, the number 4, the paranormal, at gmail.com. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into this discussion with Rob. Just one quick note, word of mouth is one of the best advertising tools, and if you're enjoying the show, please make sure you share a link with a friend, coworker, family member, let them know about the show if you think they'd like tuning in. So again, without further ado, let's get into this interview with Rob. I think this is going to be a great discussion, and once again, I really hope you enjoy tonight's episode, and thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so my guest tonight is Rob Shelsky, and Rob joined me early on in 2019 to talk about the Mandela Effect and his research for the book Shattered Reality, The Mandela Effect. Rob is a prolific writer and best-selling award-nominated author, writing fiction and nonfiction books, to include books on UFOs and the paranormal. He is a former MUFON field investigator, and he is joining me tonight to talk about the deadly and harmful aspects of UFOs based on his 2015 book, Deadly UFOs and the Disappeared. Rob, welcome back to the show.
Hi there, and it's good to be back. I enjoyed the last episode. I'm wondering what this one's going to be like.
Yeah, I did too. I thought it was a great discussion. It kind of hurt my head when we were talking about the Mandela Effect. But I think this is equally as fascinating, if not more. And it's interesting to me because there's a lot of UFO researchers out there, and it seems like there's a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different kind of takeaways from research done. And I think this one's an interesting one too. I personally don't have any one direction I go on the subject. I kind of just try and take in as much as I can and learn as much as I can. But maybe if you could take us back to how you got started, what really took you in this direction and started making you believe that maybe these guys, I'll call them ETs or aliens, just for the sake of argument. I know there's people out there that, sometimes say, we don't really know what these are. We don't know if they're interdimensional, that sort of thing. But for the sake of argument, if that's okay, I'll say aliens or ETs. And I'm just wondering how you got started down this road to believing that these are harmful or perhaps deadly to us.
Well, it was an odd path. From the time I was very young, I had an interest in UFOs, and I was raised in a family that sort of encouraged that. And one night when I was about 7, I had a really vivid dream. I don't think it was a dream, but my father insisted it must have been. But I woke up and I was looking at the back door of my house in Australia. I was in the hallway, and I saw a person, or actually 2 people, standing who had a glass window, and I could see 2 figures what looked like spacesuits, and they looked like aliens. I panicked and ran into my parents' room and said, excuse me, that there were creatures outside. And my father said, "Oh, you're just having a nightmare, go back to bed." So I did as he said, and I went back to bed, but the feeling never went away, and I've always had this intense interest in UFOs. So I just sort of followed it on through with my life, and I became more and more involved in it, did a lot of research, really explored it, investigated various sites, and eventually just sort of fell into writing about it, because when you have enough research, write a book.
Sure, and I mentioned you're a very prolific writer. You've written a lot of books, and you've written, it sounds like, some on this topic as well. And why do you think, I just find it so interesting that there's different viewpoints on this subject. If you read Dr. David Jacobs' work, he kind of goes in the same direction as you go. But then you read the work of John Mack, and he kind of goes in a different direction. Why do you think there's so much difference in viewpoints on this subject from different researchers?
Well, because we don't have the answers we want yet, number one. So that means that anyone can theorize anything, number 2. And number 3, people always bring their own personal belief systems into it to some degree and want to sort of choose how they would like it to be. And also, we've had so much interference, so much static in this field over the years. I mean, even early on, people were faking photographs. Now they're faking videos. You're getting people who are hoaxing people on the internet about different things. So it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff and know what's real and what isn't. And again, that leaves a lot of room for people to make their own interpretations. I approach this with an enthusiasm, but no set goal other than to someday maybe meet an extraterrestrial or alien, and or see a UFO or touch one or talk to the inhabitants of it. But I really had no pluses or minuses on it. In fact, if anything, I probably thought that UFOs were okay. These would be superior beings. Superior beings would be more advanced. More advanced beings would treat us even better than we treat ourselves. So what's the problem? But after doing all my research, and I did a lot of it over a lot of years, I have come to the reluctant conclusion that I don't think ETs are our space brothers. In fact, quite the opposite. I know that upsets a lot of people who want to think that they're like Santa Claus, come to save us from ourselves. And I had always hoped that myself. Again, I want to stress, I reached these conclusions very reluctantly. I don't like the conclusions I've reached, but the evidence seems to be overwhelming in that sense.
Interesting. Now, I think I heard you say in a different interview that you were really kind of in the minority of UFO researchers in your views on, perhaps the alien or ET agendas towards us. Do you think that is true, that you are really in the minority and most of the researchers out there go a different direction?
Oh, I think they do. And I think it's their choice, and they may be right. I may be wrong. I mean, there's no absolutes here. But I think, again, people sort of want to believe what they want to believe. And lately what I've noticed over the last few years is there seems to be an almost, I have to refer to it as a New Age movement towards UFOs, where we're beginning to, we're getting people who say that they can contact them and channel them, and it's just gotten worse and worse lately for me, because I'm a hard evidence kind of guy. I want to see evidence. And when someone says they just channeled an alien who's 50,000 years old, well, maybe they did, but Where's your evidence? Where's your proof? Where is anything to back up that what you're saying isn't just something you pulled out of your hat? So that's my problem lately, is that we seem to be, a lot of researchers seem to be going new age, and that they're ushering in a new cycle for us and all this, which would be wonderful if it's true. But if it is true, why are they doing the things to us that they're doing, and so often to thousands, even millions of people and their property and things? That's what I don't understand. Why is it that I see so much evidence for the negative and almost no evidence for the positive? That's what has me buffaloed.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned the fact that there's a lot of people out there that are not putting out the truth on this subject. And I agree. That's what's so difficult about it, especially with the internet and social media. There's so much information out there, and and I agree, it's so hard to separate the wheat from the chaff. The other interesting aspect,
it really is. I mean, you have to have multiple sources for your information, and you have to try to find the most impeccable ones. And sometimes even those are flawed. One quick case is the time travel story of the man from Torred. A guy back in the 50s lands in Japan. He shows him a passport from Torred. There is no such country. He has a checkbook from a bank in Torred. There is no such bank. All his documents look absolutely correct and valid, but they're from a country that doesn't exist. They put him up in a hotel while the Japanese immigration officials decide what to do with him, but he disappears, and they don't know where he went or how he went, because with that passport he shouldn't have been able to get out of the country. Lovely story. It's been around for years, and a lot of people who are into time travel discuss that story as if we're absolute truth and fact. Yet after having researched it, I can't find anything to support that it isn't just a cultural myth. There is no newspaper evidence, no magazine articles. There is nothing from that time period, either before or shortly after that, that talks about this at all. In fact, it didn't even become more of a common story till a few decades later. So is the story true? I don't know. But since it lacks all evidence that I can find to support it, I have to say that it probably is not. So this is what we have to do with UFOs, too. You have to reach in and find the actual evidence. I'm a hard evidence kind of guy because I want hard answers. I want to kick the tires of a UFO. I don't want to go all mystical and mythical about them. I don't want to go through these various phases that we seem to do in our culture, where first we condemn something terribly, as with the Native Americans, and then, because when I was growing up as a child, we played cowboy and Indians, and nobody wanted to be the Indians. They were bad. Then later on, we decided that actually maybe the Native Americans had the right idea, and they were the noble person. So we go from one extreme to another in this country, and I like to keep a middle road.
You mentioned the evidence, and that's one of the things I'm finding unbelievable to me, though. There's still a lot of skeptics out there that, to this day, even with the press releases coming out a couple of years, or almost 2 years ago, I guess about a year and a half ago, the New York Times article came out, and there seems to be a lot of, there's no hard evidence per se. Nobody, there's no UFOs parking on the White House or anything like that. But how do you address it? Because, there is so many compelling stories and cases and, eyewitnesses and that sort of thing. But what do you say to those hardcore skeptics that are still saying you have no hard evidence, there's no bodies, that sort of thing? How do you kind of deal with that?
Well, usually I stare at them in amazement. There was one fellow in England on my last trip over there that was just like, well, I have to tell you, I don't believe in this stuff. And I said, well, I don't believe in it either, because belief is faith in something which cannot be proven. And I don't believe in approaching anything like that. I want evidence. I said, and the evidence is in, the facts are in. I said, you can sit there and say you don't believe any of this, but I can tell you that your own field air marshal does, that Churchill did, that presidents of the United States did. I said, so if I have to bounce them against you, guess who wins? He didn't like the answer very much, but it was truthful.
Yeah, and to me, it's with so many compelling cases and so many eyewitnesses and very credible witnesses, to include U.S. astronauts, it does still...
Oh, we're talking astronauts, we're talking space shuttle commanders, we are talking police, we are talking military. pilots. We're talking military officials. We are talking commercial pilots. We are talking police on the ground, soldiers on the ground. We're talking thousands, millions actually now around the world who claim to have seen it. They have photographed it. They have videoed it. Yes, some is hoped. A lot is not. And they all want answers, just like you and I do. So to me, the evidence is in. UFOs exist. Now the question is, who are they and why are they here? What do they want?
Right, and I would agree with you there. I think it's a foregone conclusion for me as well. The other interesting aspect about your direction you go in this is I would say it would make more sense if this truly is more of a nefarious agenda. It would make sense that the government would have a reason to, keep a tight wrap on this issue and be close hold about it, because if they truly do know that they don't mean us well, there is ill intent, don't you think it would make sense that they continue to have a truth embargo on the issue?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if the aliens truly were our space brothers, there'd be very little reason for the government not to say, well, let's welcome E.T., he wants to phone home. But that isn't what they're doing. The government seems to be hiding it, and the government seems to even be hiding it from part of itself. Senator Inouye, now deceased, Senator of Hawaii, said that there is a different government. There's a secret government that has access to its own military, Navy, and Air Force. And what he meant was that there were people who had such power that even the president was locked out of the system, and these people could command these forces if they wanted to. And he was quite serious about it. And by the way, he's not the only senator to say that. There are others. So, and congressmen as well. And of course, there are presidents who have talked about UFOs to a certain degree. Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan. I mean, Ronald Reagan supposedly saw a UFO twice, he and Nancy Reagan. And Jimmy Carter saw one when he was governor of Georgia. So, and they both said they were going to, find out more about it once they're president. Well, once they became president, they both climbed up. Nothing at all about it, at all. That's strange. I mean, he might have said, Jimmy Carter might have said, well, I looked into it, and they assure me it's just, odd lights in the sky. But he didn't answer at all. I think he didn't want to lie, so he just didn't answer.
And I'm curious, based on what you're seeing going on today, I've had other UFO researchers on the show, one of them which said there's an army of UFO researchers out there. There's more and more. I mean, you listen to, Richard Dolan talk. His sense is that there's so much weight, and it keeps getting heavier and heavier, if you will, the pressure on governments and, on the U.S. government in particular to finally disclose, at least at some level, on this issue. Where do you see that going? Do you see that we're getting close to that, or do you think this is going to continue in the same direction? I know we had Chris.
I hope we're getting close to it. But I have my doubts. The government seems to, once it declares something top secret, it seems to want to keep it top secret, even if it should be, or even if everyone knows it's no longer a secret, like with Area 51. For several decades, everyone knew Area 51 existed, but the government wouldn't have done any maps, and they never acknowledged its existence. Well, you can deny the existence of a refrigerator, but try walking through one. And that's how I think it is with UFOs. But the track record of our government disclosing this has not been a good one. It just has been a long, prolonged cover-up as far as I can tell. I mean, with the Roswell incident, we had the original lieutenant, coming out, and he's in a newspaper showing a part of the disc. And then later they say, it's a weather balloon. And then when people didn't really buy that, they said, it was a special secret weather balloon, to spy on our enemies. And when people didn't buy that, they said, it was a special secret weather balloon that had dummies on it. That would account for the alien bodies. I mean, so they just go on and on, changing the story slightly, and each time they come out with a new version of it, we're supposed to accept it as true. And the news media, by and large, does. In fact, the news media seems to be almost collaborating with the government in that sense. We've all been taught that if you see a UFO and tell anyone, you'll be laughed at, you'll be ridiculed, you'll be called crazy, you'll be told you should wear a tinfoil hat, you will see news anchor people on TV smirking and joking. Well, a UFO was seen last night over Greensboro. I mean, this is typical. If you're a commercial pilot and you report one, you can be subject to a psychiatric evaluation. There was one case where they had the transcript from a commercial pilot flying a jet full of people, and he had a navigator and a flight attendant with him in the cockpit at the time. And he described this thing in detail. It had followed them for several hours. And then they said, do you want to report a UFO? And he hesitated. It was quite clear. You can hear his voice say, no, I don't want to report one of those. They're scared too. There was a Japanese commercial pilot that flew a jet over Japan, was hounded by a UFO for hours. And another jet saw it as well, and ground radar saw it. Well, when he got back to Japan and reported it, his superiors gave him a desk job. End of his career.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of pressure not to divulge information.
And I think is that the 1986 case you're talking about, where the Japanese airline pilot spotted the UFO somewhere over Alaska, I think it was?
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
He ended up in a desk job. I mean, I don't know what to tell you other than the fact that if the aliens are our friends, if they are our space brothers, if they present no danger, why is the government trying so hard against a rising tide, as you pointed out, of people who have a lot of evidence, still saying that this doesn't exist? And yet film from the Pentagon leaks out of, we have the incident with the Nimitz where Navy jet fighters are zooming up to this thing. I think there were 6 of them. And the commander of the group said he saw it. It looked like a giant Tic Tac. It was cylinder-shaped, had no wings, no apparent means of propulsion, but it was able to do fantastic stuff. You know, they couldn't keep up with it. So this is their own military saying this. So who do you believe? Do you believe the skeptics who want to say, oh, it's a firefly trapped between 2 windshields on a jet that they saw, not a UFO? Or do you believe the commander of a group of Navy pilots who actually saw it and described it and made it public?
Right, and I wanted to talk about well, it's funny. First of all, it's funny you mentioned the fact that news reporters, have, derided people who, put out reports of seeing UFOs, and even after that New York Times article broke in late 2017, one of our local news stations here talked about it on the news, and then one of the reporters said, maybe we have evidence of little green men, and kind of snickered, and they moved on to the next story. This is, after...
They always chuckle, and they always roll their eyes. Oh, we have another UFO report tonight, And this just goes on and on and on. And all of this is geared to make it a taboo subject, to make it the third rail. No scientist can get a grant to study the UFO phenomenon. No scientist can get a grant to study the abduction phenomenon, whether it's real or not. If over 1 million people in America say they've been abducted, it's certainly a sociological issue, one that sociologists should study and question and try to find out why so many people could be so self-deluded. They don't. Don't go near this. It's the third rail. Touch it and you die, career-wise. And it's happened before in science, but right now, because the government controls all the grants for most of the universities, if you want to get a grant, you don't tell them you want to study UFOs, because if you do, you not only won't get the grant, you probably won't keep your position at the university. It's that bad.
Hey everybody, this is Curry here. I really hope you enjoy tuning into the Passion for the Paranormal podcast show, but did you actually know you can get paid just for listening to this podcast? I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I discovered this free new app, and they call it Podcoin, and it literally pays you to listen to podcasts. So here's how this thing works. You listen to podcasts, and you earn the Podcoin while you listen, and then you take that Podcoin and you turn it in for gift cards at places like Amazon or Starbucks, and if you're a really good person, you can even decide to donate that Podcoin to charity. So the more you listen, the more you earn. So here's what I want you to do. Download the app right now on your iPhone or Android device, and I have a special code for you. Simply use the code PARANORMAL, and you'll get 300 Podcoin just for signing up. And if you listen to enough of us on there, you can get a cappuccino at Starbucks or even an Amazon gift card. So go ahead and listen to this podcast or virtually any podcast you enjoy on Podcoin, and sign up with that special code PARANORMAL.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I had Dr. Diana Pasolka on. She's a tenured professor at University in North Carolina, Wilmington. She talked about that, but she's put out a book on it now, and I think after she started doing research, she's kind of went a different direction on the topic. So it does. I don't know. Personally, I think it's kind of slowly changing, and now the Navy just said they're coming out with protocol for reporting on these things. But do you think this kind of stuff will continue now with all of this in light of all the stuff that's come out recently? Or, I mean, is it going to eventually change, or are we just going to continue in the same direction?
Well, that's what we all wonder. That's we're all sitting, waiting, and watching. And every year, everyone's screaming, "Oh, it's about to be disclosed! Great news! Watch this, watch that! It'll be disclosed," and it never is. So I'm beginning to lose faith it'll ever be disclosed. But you would think that sooner or later, the government is going to have to admit to it if everyone knows about it, has the evidence for it, and really whether the government then admits it or not is almost a moot point, because the majority of Americans now believe UFOs exist.
Absolutely.
Over a million say they've been abducted. So with numbers like that, does it really matter whether the government wants to agree with it or not? And the fact that it doesn't want to and doesn't want to disclose and is hiding things, as Senator Inouye said, makes me suspect that they have very big reasons for not doing so. And those reasons can't be numerous. They have to be, I would say, 3 or 4 reasons tops. Either the government is powerless to do anything about this and is trying to keep the peace, or the government is aware that it's happening and can't do anything about it, or, and this is the worst scenario, the government is aware that it's happening and has made some kind of accord or agreement with the extraterrestrials. Yes, you can mutilate our animals. Yes, you can do whatever the heck you want to our people, but just keep it on the low side so that everyone can go on thinking that life's okay and they're secure and their government's taking care of them. I mean, if your government can't stop you from being abducted or your children from your own home and subjected to what basically is torture by any standard and then released but having your mind wiped about it, doesn't mean that the torture wasn't real and wasn't there. It happened. Just because someone gives you a drug or something to make you stop remembering it, I don't buy it. And by the way, there is a scientist who studied over 800 cases of people who claim to have been abducted, and what he found was that in almost all of them, they suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And you don't get post-traumatic stress disorder from your imagination. You get it from a real, horrifying event.
Right. Yeah, and I think some have said, when you go the direction of them having ill intent toward us, some would say, well, why have they not attacked us en masse yet if they really truly do? And again, this is just a devil's advocate kind of thing to the argument. Some would say, well, why have they not attacked us yet? Even though there have been, onesies and twosies cases. How do you kind of address that aspect?
I don't think they have an intention of attacking us. That when I say deadly UFOs and disappeared in my book, what I'm referring to the fact is that in countless cases, people have had their property damaged by UFOs. Houses, garage, water tanks, ranches, animals, ponds. They seem to love water and love to drain things. But there are very strong cases to prove it. I mean, there's one case in near Roseville, Australia, Victoria, Australia, where a guy was managing a ranch. He was there alone, but he saw a UFO over the water tank. He saw a siphon come down. He saw it churn it up and take the water. Now, then the thing took off. Well, that tank held 10,000 gallons of water. 10,000 gallons. And when it was examined by the authorities, they found that the mud at the bottom of it, the residue, the sediment, had been sucked up into a cone shape in the center, as if something had been sucking the pond dry, just as the guy had reported. Also, he fell ill from it. And then a pond later on another ranch they saw a UFO hovering over it and sucking water out of it. May not seem like a big deal to us here in America, but I lived in Australia, and when you're in the outback, your water is almost as precious as gold. It means the life or death of your animals. When something comes along and drains the entire water supply you have on a ranch, and this is the only way you can feed your cattle or sheep, you've got big problems, and so do the cattle and sheep. So this wasn't a minor thing.
Yeah, and you cover a lot of cases, I know, in your book, both of deaths, and damage and injuries, disappearances. And I know you can't talk about, because again, you cover a lot of cases here. What are some of the more significant or maybe some of the more recent cases you've examined and researched where it has resulted in deaths as a result of UFO sightings or UFO encounters?
Well, luckily, although there have been a lot of deaths, they're not often. They're sporadic. But there was a case in the Soviet Union shortly before it fell where some divers saw some strange figures diving at a depth without diving suits and decided to chase them, and they did. They were actually trying to net them, and there were, I believe there were 4 divers. And all of a sudden, a force, as they described it, pushed them to the surface when they got close to these other strange divers. It pushed them to the surface so fast that they went through the bends. Now, the captain on board the ship that they were on only had a decompression tank that would hold 2. You tried to fit all the men in there. The result was most of them died, and one was crippled for life. Well, this is not a pleasant thing, and the men to this day don't deny the story. And also, a silver saucer-shaped object was seen leaving Lake Baikal shortly later, and this isn't the only case that happened. Then you have the Dyatlov Pass in Russia back in the 50s, where all those students died very mysteriously when orange orbs had been seen in the sky in that area just the night before and several nights before. Then you have the pilot, I believe his name was Michael Valentich. I might have that wrong. I think his last name is right. And he was flying a plane in Australia, and he reported seeing UFOs. They were buzzing him. He was, you can read the transcript for yourself from the control tower. They talked to him, and all of a sudden there's a strange, weird noise, and then nothing. And that's the end of him. No plane, no nothing ever again. This goes on and on. Again, it doesn't happen. I hope it's not happening as regularly as I think it might be, but it is happening. We had a jet in the 50s try to intercept a plane over, I think it was Lake Superior, one of the Great Lakes. And I think it's the flight pilot was Robert Moncla, and he and his co-pilot merged with the UFO on the radar screens because it's clearly seen on radar from the ground, and they became one, and then they never saw him again. No wreckage from the plane was ever found. No bodies were ever found. Nothing, ever. They just disappeared forever. And then you have all the people who disappear every year from this world permanently. In the United States alone, there's around 1 million people a year who disappear. Now, the majority of them are parents snatching the children from another parent, runaway children, people breaking up and trying to find a new life, trying to get a new identity, or they're murdered and they're buried, or they're kidnapped. Now, if you take all of that out of that million, that still leaves around 50 to 60,000 people, according to the FBI. My number was more conservative. I said 50. The FBI says, I think, 60 or 65, who disappear permanently. No traces ever found. That's the United States alone. What about Australia? What about Canada? What about Europe? What about the UK? If you start adding all these permanently disappeared people every single year together, you get an amazing number of people who vanish from the face of the earth. Far more than we can account for, and certainly can't account for through the normal means of kidnapping, murder. I shouldn't say normal, but you know what I mean. The normal methods that people disappear, we're seen to. Murder, kidnapping, abduction, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's every year, and it's all around the world. And where are these people going to? Even David Paulides, in his books, Missing 411, he talks about how many have disappeared from our own national and state parks permanently, and are found either dead or under very bizarre circumstances, if found at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard some of his interviews. Haven't read any of his work yet, but it's really is a frightening. Is really frightening to think that people are just disappearing the way they are. National parks, and people are in a group with other people, and they're 20 yards, 30 yards back, and all of a sudden people look back and they're gone, and there's no tracks, there's no evidence they were attacked by an animal, no blood, nothing like that. And it boggles the mind to think that this stuff is going on and how it is happening. I find it interesting.
We don't want to think. In Alaska alone, over a 15-year period, it's called the Alaska Triangle because of it. So many people have disappeared in Alaska compared to the whole population that approximately 7% of the population of Alaska has disappeared forever, never been seen again. That's the Alaska Triangle. Then you have the Bennington Triangle in New England, and you have the same problem. It just goes on and on. You have all these areas where there seem to be mass disappearances, people walking around a boulder on a hiking trail, and people right behind them, and then they don't see them when they go around the boulder. They don't see them ever again. They don't find their belongings. The person vanishes. They vanish from buses. An old man up in Vermont was driving on a bus, had his luggage on it, vanished. When they got there, he wasn't there. No one knows what happened to him. He was staying in an old soldier's home. Never showed up there again. His luggage was still on the bus. Where did he go? I mean, he was obviously destitute. No one would rob him, per se. But this happens not a few times, not tens of times or hundreds of times, but tens of thousands of times. So when you start piling up all this evidence, you have to consider that aliens are not our space brothers, that they might be something else entirely. What are they doing with all the disappeared? It's bad enough they abduct people and return them to Earth after subjecting them to what amounts to torture, for most of them, because they have PTSD. So what's happening to the people who disappear permanently in the hundreds of thousands every year, every single year, permanently?
Right.
Never seen or heard from it. And this has been going on for centuries now.
Now, in your research, have you come across some cases? I know you talked about some, group disappearances, even villages. In that research, have you found some cases where there were a lot of UFO sightings in conjunction with disappearances? Any that really lean towards that they may have been abducted and disappeared in some of the most compelling cases you've researched?
Well, absolutely. In fact, in most of the ones, because I wouldn't research things that didn't seem to have a UFO element. I would just assume there was some other reason the person disappeared, wanting to start a new life or being killed or kidnapped or whatever. I try to keep it as rigid a control on it as possible when I research this stuff. Well, there are quite a few cases. The injuries bother me too. The case of the three people in Texas that saw a UFO on a road on a deserted highway. I think her last name was Cash, if I remember right. But there was the mother, there was the grandmother, and there was a son. And they saw a UFO. One approached it. The car became incredibly hot. Even the handle burned them when they tried to get into it. But the one that approached it most closely, the mother, later that night she became extremely ill. They had to rush her to the hospital. She basically had what they thought was extreme radiation poisoning. And then the grandmother began to do the same thing and undergo the same problems. And the son was sick too. They all ended up in the hospital, and the hospital didn't know how to treat them. They didn't know what could have caused it. So it's one of the cases. And of course, one of them eventually died from it. And there was a case of a man in Brazil who died from it. I don't know which case. The most notorious cases are the Dyatlov Pass, the Soviets. Again, the case of the people in Texas, and my mind's blanking now on what their name is, but and it goes on. And the case of the young pilot in Australia. All these stand out to me because they were so well documented. UFOs were seen prior to the night. They were seen on that night, and they were seen after that night. And other people in the Texas case saw helicopters chasing what appeared to be a UFO later that same night. And helicopters had shown up at the incident. And later, when they had attended an air show in Texas, they saw a helicopter, and it was a Chinook, and they talked to the pilot, and he didn't know who they were. And he said, "Oh, yeah, we were out that night. Yeah, we were chasing something." And then we found out who they were. He clammed up and closed the exhibit and left. So why? There was nothing going on.
It's interesting. What do you make of...
By the way, they sued the government, and they lost because they didn't have ultimate proof that it was the government's doing that caused the illnesses. But they even went so far as to sue the government. The cases, for me, blur after a while because there's literally tens of thousands of them. But I have to say that considering how many people have been involved in injuries and illnesses and deaths with regard to UFOs, I have to ask the question, what are they doing that's good?
What do you make of? There's a gentleman who did a documentary, and he's written a book or two on UFOs and their visits to our nuclear facilities and nuclear bases. What do you make of UFOs and them going over nuclear facilities and bases and some of the things that have been reported as a result of that? I know Robert Salas is one who's a former missile officer who's came out and talked about this.
Well, they do seem to have suddenly developed since the 1940s an interest in our military bases, particularly our nuclear ones. There was a case where one was buzzing a military base, and the missiles started their own launch sequence, and they couldn't shut it down. Scared the hell out of them, frankly. And but they managed it. But we have another case where they came near a military base, and they were launching a rocket of some sort, apparently a test missile, and there you can clearly see in the image the UFO, and a beam shoots out from it and hits the rocket. Shortly after that, the rocket goes off course, and crashes. It was almost as if it was a demonstration of their power. But we have seen them around our nuclear power plants. We see them around military bases all the time, not just here, but in South America and Europe as well, and Australia and other places. They seem to be taking a very active interest in our military.
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of ways you could take that. One, you could say perhaps they're concerned about what we're doing with our nuclear buildup, and perhaps, I think on the other side of the coin, some of the researchers are going to say they're very concerned about what we're doing, and perhaps they don't want us to kill each other. I guess on the other flip side of that, you could say
they're very concerned about us killing each other, probably, or they're very, very concerned about nuclear weapons. Maybe they don't want the planet destroyed. Maybe they figure they shall inherit the earth. But that maybe that demonstration of power of triggering a launch sequence was a demonstration of just what they could do if we carried that sort of thing too far. Which sounds nice on the face of it. Like, oh, goody, we can't have a nuclear war. They will stop it. Maybe. Or maybe they just don't want prime real estate ruined before they have a chance to take it over. Who knows? We don't know their motivations. That's the problem. All we know is that injuries occur, property damage occurs, deaths occur, and it goes on and on. If you ask me about a singular event that sums this up for me, I would have to say it took place in the late 1980s in Brazil near Sao Paulo in a reservoir. They found a man's body. Kids saw, he'd gone fishing and he saw a pile of clothes on the other side and what looked like someone laying there. So he called the authorities and they came out and they investigated and they found a man that was dead. They took him away and it died down, and everyone thought, oh, well, it's just a gangland killing or something, because they dumped bodies by the reservoir. However, in this case, several years later, the report leaked out, and it was the coroner's own report, complete with pictures. You can look it up on the internet yourself. This guy was found dead. They had found that part of his jaw had been removed. His eyeballs had been removed. His tongue had been excised. There was no blood anywhere, so they said it had to be like absolutely precise surgical surgery or some type of laser. They found that his internal organs had been sucked out of him through tiny holes in his armpits and in his stomach. And they, when they did the research on how he exactly died, he died apparently from a hemorrhage in the brain brought on by severe shock and trauma and great pain. He literally died in pain and fear. The body was dumped there, and it hadn't been there long enough for vultures to have done the work on it, nor did they see any animal bites or signs that any animal had touched it. By the way, his rectum had been excised from him as well, just as it is with a lot of mutilated cattle. Someone took this guy and treated him exactly as the mutilated animals have been treated in their thousands, and worse, they did it without any kind of painkiller and anesthesia. They treated him exactly as if he were a dumb animal, and I don't think any animal's that dumb where it doesn't feel pain. So this is a horrendous, horrific ending to this man's life, and no one can account for it. And yet UFOs had been seen in the area just prior to the event. So there you go. It may not be a smoking gun, but I don't know how anyone can explain what happened to this man and how he died that way. No gang tortures people that way. They don't even have the equipment or capability. How do you manage through a tiny hole, which, by the way, matched the other one under the armpit perfectly, to suck out the pancreas and the liver and everything else? The man's body was collapsed because the internal organs had been removed through little tiny holes. He hadn't been cut open and gutted, and I know that's a horrible image I'm giving your listeners, but this is important because if you're abducted and something like this happens to you, or God forbid one of your children who's abducted with you, I don't think you're going to think that aliens are our space brothers.
Wow, it's just disturbing, and it makes you think.
Well, for me, it goes way beyond disturbing. It's absolutely horrifying and frightening. And again, I come to these conclusions reluctantly. I did not ever anticipate that I would see an alien race as such a danger to us. I always felt that the more advanced races or species would have more advanced morals and ethics. But these creatures seem to be amoral or immoral. But they certainly don't seem to be doing anything good. People say, well, they do good. I said, really? I said, you hear about all these abductions and these torturous surgical practices that people have to undergo. But I don't ever hear about an alien craft shining a laser beam into the woods to bring Hansel and Gretel out of the woods safely, or anything like that. I said, where exactly is your evidence for what good they do? Several people said, well, there were some people that were abducted that had cancer cured. And I said, you can count that on one hand. You can count that on one hand. I can show you tens of thousands of cases where it's just the reverse. And how do you know that if someone isn't being abducted regularly and is part of an experiment, they want the experiment to continue, so they cured the cancer so it could? I said, literally, you can count the number of nice events, and then, of course, you get people like Travis Walton, who started off saying how horrendous it was, and then over the years, now his story has changed quite a bit, and he thinks it was a positive experience. I'm not sure how, having read the initial case and not going by the movie, which was completely distorted. But people do that. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. We begin to relate with our kidnappers after a while. And also, we want to find reason for what happens to us. There has to be a reason, and hopefully it's a positive one, a good one, and not a bad one. So only over the years after the incident did he finally begin to evolve this new approach to it, where he thinks it was a positive experience. But that belies everything he said before. So is he telling the truth? I think he tells the truth as he sees it. Sure he does. But the way he sees it has changed. Perspective has changed. And a lot of people are beginning to see the whole extraterrestrial question the same way, as these are our saviors, these are our space brothers, these are people who will help us and guide us and take care of us. And it's like, well, where do you see that happening? Because I sure don't. I don't see that happening anywhere.
What?
And I don't. I'm sorry, I just don't. I wish I could.
What do you make?
With some planning to this.
What do you make of cases like the Phoenix Lights, where so many people, and I think it was over 10,000 witnesses, some of these witnesses were reporting feeling some sort of telepathic message as they were watching these UFOs fly at low altitude, almost like they were getting a message of, it's like a peaceful message. Hey, we're here. We're just letting you know we're here. And again, I'm not saying I agree to it.
Radio host who said that he had both. He had a terrible scenario one time with a UFO, and another time he had a great one where they said it's all peace. Well, you know what? Anyone can say anything. And back in the 50s, so-called contactees were saying the same thing, and also saying they're taken on board ships and taken to Venus and Saturn and seeing what life was like on those planets. And, of course, we know now that those planets don't support life of any kind. They're absolute hellholes. But these people were convinced. Were they lying? They could have been. Or were they telling the truth as they had seen it and experienced it? That could be true. Well, if people can have their minds blank after horrible torture sessions on board a UFO, which leaves them with PTSD and they don't know why, then I would think it might be pretty easy for aliens to lie to people and disseminate false information, disinformation. We all claim our government's doing with regard to UFOs. What makes us think that aliens aren't doing it too?
And there's researchers out there that say that there's different species of ETs visiting us. And I'm wondering from your research, or not even from your research, but just do you think it's possible there may be different species out there with different agendas, and perhaps maybe there are some that are more peaceful, and there's others that have more ill intent? Where do you sit on that aspect of it?
Well, yes, it could easily be more than one species. I mean, the Vedic texts of the Hindus describe a number of different types of demons, as they call them, in a great war back in the ancient times that took place on Earth and space and even on the moon. So, yes, there could be more than one species. I don't rule that out. If there's one or two, there's us and them, so to speak, there could be more. And there may be some species that are more neutral. At one convention in Baltimore that I went to, actually it was a conference, a woman said, well, you don't account for the fact that there are benign people. I said, well, if they're so benign, why are they doing this? And she says, well, they may not be doing it, but they may have a non-interference policy. I said, okay, you have a friend who has a non-interference policy, and you're sitting there being tortured, and that friend has the power to stop it, to interfere, and doesn't. How good a friend is that? They may be non-interfering, but that non-interference isn't doing us any good because they're allowing the others to interfere with us, and in very bad ways, repeatedly, throughout the ages, it seems like. We don't seem to have a choice in that. We're like sheep. And you've seen what cattle mutilations and sheep mutilations look like, and that's what I fear for us. I'm not saying that they are without hope, that this is the ultimate answer, that I am absolutely right and everyone else is wrong. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying this is, given the huge body of evidence of property damage, injuries, and death, and disappearances of even entire villages, for instance, I think you have to raise a red flag there and say, well, maybe they're not quite as nice as we had hoped they were going to be, meaning they could be quite destructive. They certainly don't seem to treat us with human rights at all. And then another lady at that same conference said, well, maybe they're so far advanced from us, they're like, we're like insects to them, like ants. And I said, yes, but even I try to not kill an ant if I don't have to. So I've evolved enough to have some morality with regard to ants. And I said, if they're so advanced beyond us, you think their morality would be higher and better, not worse or non-existent. I said, in any case, whatever their feelings towards us are, if we are as ants to them, whether for good or bad reasons in their eyes, we ants have to take care of ourselves because nobody's doing it for us, apparently, not the non-interfering space brothers or the evil aliens or even our government. The only one that seems to be looking out for us is us.
And I'm curious what your take is on there's a lot of people that have claimed to have been abducted or have went through hypnotic regression about their abductions, and some researchers don't seem to put a lot of stock in the hypnotic regression because they feel like the patient's being led. But where do you kind of stand on the whole hypnotic regression and the information that comes as a result of that?
I'm not too much in favor of it. People said, oh, you don't like it at all. I said, no, I don't mind hypnotic regression, but you have got to get a top-notch hypnotist who has worked in the field and knows how not to use the power of suggestion to suggest memories, because that's exactly what hypnotism is, the power of suggestion. And they've done it with past lives. If you have someone in a hypnotic state and you say, now tell me about your past lives, the person will quite willingly oblige you and make up past lives. And then when they wake up, they remember those as real memories. But probably not. They're probably just a fictional story because the power of suggestion says they should do it. So, like, if you're approaching someone and saying, I want to learn about past lives, so you have hypnotism, you can say yes, but you have to make darn sure they're not the type of people who would say, okay, tell me about your past lives, but rather would try to regress you and have you remembered for yourself. But even then, subtle hints can direct the human mind to give the answers that are wanted. Just as children in the early child molestations in California at that daycare center gave the court psychiatrists the answers that they wanted and were later found to be totally false in that particular case because the children 5 and 6 years old had felt pressured to answer the way the psychiatrist kept wanting them to answer. So power of suggestion is powerful and it's a great tool, but you must be very careful with it.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. What do you make of there's been a lot of people that have claimed they've had alien implants implanted into them during abductions. What, based on your research, what do you make of this this whole phenomena of people getting implants, and maybe what the agenda is here?
Well, I think it's real. I mean, one of the things that got me interested in UFOs was my brother, and I didn't know anything about this at the time, when he was 16, saw a UFO with a friend while they were camping in the desert, followed it, decided to follow it because it looked like it might have come down nearby. They didn't know what it was. And they remember leaving the campground around midnight. That's the last thing we remember. The next morning, they're striking camp, and they're leaving and going home. His friend's father picks them up, and they drove them back to San Diego from the Borrego Springs. And they never discussed it, never talked about it. This was like that for almost 20 years or so. Then out of the clear blue, my brother was watching a show on UFOs and remembered the incident. And also, just a little bit earlier, he'd been in the shower, and he said a gray, either plastic or metal piece came out from near his elbow. And he thinks that's what actually jarred him to have the memory in the first place. So he called his friend John and said, "Do you remember this?" "Yeah, I do." "Now?" He says, "You didn't remember it before?" "No." He says, "We didn't even discuss it that next morning when we woke up. Why didn't we do that?" And John goes, "I don't know." But they became so intrigued that John left San Diego with his entire family, sold his house, and moved to Vegas to be near my brother so they could continue researching the whole thing. So for them, it was a very real and very traumatic experience. And yes, I do think that implants occur in people, and I think they occur in people a lot more than people realize.
Yeah, any thoughts about what they're doing with these implants? I mean, I've heard some people say, well, maybe they're tracking devices, but they don't seem to have a problem finding people. I'm just curious if you have any kind of theories on what these may be or what the purpose may be of them.
Well, they could be tracking devices, no doubt about it, because people have had repeat abduction experiences, often are the ones that have these implants in them. It may be so that no matter where they move or what they do, they can still be found. There is another thought that I had that worries me even more. What if they're not tracking devices? What if they're controlling devices? We know in the case of patient 17 that the documentary on that the nerve endings in the limb actually had fused and bonded with the material, the implant, when it was pulled out. This thing was connected to their nervous system. So what if these aren't tracking devices? What if they're sleeper cells? At any time they can be awakened, and these people are then completely under their control, and we have tens of thousands of these people all over the planet, a sleeping army ready at their command at any point in time. It's a scary thought.
It's terribly frightening, and I do remember reading about that before. About that possibility, and it certainly is a very frightening thought to think that that they could possibly gain control of the person who's been implanted, and that person would be at their bidding. And it is a very, very scary but certainly possible scenario here. Any way you look at it, it is really kind of frightening to think that they are doing this. Well,
the unknown is often frightening, and we don't know that is what they're doing. It may just be tracking devices. But even with what we know for sure, that people are being abducted, that there are UFOs, that there apparently are a lot of incidents where people get hurt, get sick, or killed, but you have to kind of wonder, what are they doing here, and why does it seem to completely ignore the importance of the individual, of the human involved? I mean, in some cases, there's mental telepathy, and they're saying it's going to be all right. It's just we'll get you back, and they do. But my problem is only after subjecting them to some pretty horrible stuff without anesthesia or any kind of painkiller. And of course, their answer is to then make you forget it. But of course, it's so traumatic that some people remember spontaneously. Some people have their lives are messed up from that point forward, and they seek psychiatric help, and that's how they find out about it. I mean, this is not something people just would casually want to have happen to them. In fact, it's a violation of basic human rights. You don't snatch people, kidnap them, abduct them, and then torture them, and then release them and say, it's okay because I made you forget what happened to you.
And perhaps the even more frightening aspect of this is the abductees seem to feel helpless about what they can do about it. And, to me, that's the most frightening part of this is if you're an abductee and maybe you've been abducted several times, I mean, you don't know when it's going to happen and you feel helpless to do anything about it. And I can't imagine there's not a whole lot more I can imagine that would be more fearful than, having that helpless feeling and knowing there's nothing you can do about it.
Oh, it'd be awful that there's no place to hide, that they can seek you out and get you wherever you are under any circumstances, you and your family members. You might be on that UFO and one of your children might be on there with you on the next table, and there are people who report just that. So it's a horrible, frightening thing, and that may be why the government's covering it up. We don't mind driving at night to go to the grocery store to get that bottle of milk we'll need in the morning because we feel pretty safe doing it. But what if we knew that at any given moment a close vehicle or vessel up in the sky could just take us at any moment, at any time? And when you get home, your family says, well, where have you been? Like, oh, I've only been gone a few minutes. No, you've been gone an hour and a half. And that happens. It happened with my brother and his friend. They don't claim abduction. They simply claim missing time because they do have it. But he won't claim abduction because he has no memory of being abducted. But they do have, they can't account for midnight till they woke up in their tents at 9 in the morning. So there's missing time there. They don't know what happened when they started out into the desert to track down whatever it was that they thought came down. So, and was he abducted? My personal feeling is probably. Does he have proof of it? No. He asked me what I thought about hypnotism. I said, I wouldn't do it until you're absolutely sure it's a perfectly great hypnotist because you don't want false memories implanted in you.
Sure. And I had a while back, it's been several months, actually probably about 9 months ago, I had Butch Witkowski on the show, and he's been researching a very, very bizarre case, and that is the case of Contactees. And there really doesn't seem to be a whole lot of answers in that case. I'm wondering if you're familiar with it and if you've looked into it yourself.
I'm sorry, which particular case was that?
This is the Contactees case, and happened in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. And again, Butch Witkowski has been looking into this case for several years, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of answers other than supposedly there was some people that spotted a UFO, and this guy was up on the ridge trying to spot deer, and then he suddenly disappeared, and they had search parties combing the woods looking for his body, and then, the next day his body turns up 100 yards from the back door of his home. And it seems impossible that all of those search party members would not have found him there at the time they were searching for him. I was just wondering if you were familiar with that case.
I know of the case. I don't know it in detail. I mean, again, there are thousands of cases of this, and I think they all have equal value, but you can't really study them all. I tend to focus on things where UFOs are sighting prior or after, where people had, and also, and that's a good case for one reason, because there's other people involved. You just have one person say, I saw a UFO. Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, You can believe them or not, choose to believe them. But when a group of people insist that something is valid or true, that carries more weight with me than an individual. I mean, people are sentenced to death on the basis of a group of people called a jury. So if a group of people tell me that they really saw something and, it's upset them, and you do have to investigate them, you do have to talk to them and check out their backgrounds. And then you have to decide whether or not you think that they really believe what they saw. And in so many cases, I do. Now, what they saw might have been erroneous, but by the same token, what they saw might have been actual fact, too. And then I look for hard evidence, traces of anything on the ground, if it landed, any photographs they might have, is it near an air base? I mean, when I was a MUFON investigator, there's a woman over near Raleigh, and she's a UFO, and I went over and talked to her. She seemed quite rational and real about it. Then I investigated where she saw it. It was right near a small private airport, so it could have been a plane. And then there was also the Raleigh-Durham Airport, which was very close by, and it had been a cloudy day, and she saw this in the clouds moving by, and I thought, it could be the nose cone of a jet as it's turning its circle. Did she see a UFO? She believes she did. Did she? I really don't know. But whenever you don't know, you have to err on the side of caution. So I had to make the report and say it probably wasn't a UFO. And we do that in about 95% of the cases. We're very careful and very thorough on that sort of thing, so that the evidence we do compile, the data that we do get, is very reliable usually, given, of course, the oddball one that might not be. But overall, I would say it's about 95, 96% reliable data.
Do you think that, so there's, again, we talked about there's a lot of UFO researchers out there and a lot of different viewpoints. Do you think some of them come across the same kind of evidence that you've gathered, and that maybe they choose to maybe ignore some of it, or because it doesn't fit with their preconceived notions, they do choose to dismiss it? Do you think that goes on a lot with UFO researchers?
Well, yes, I do. I think most of us have some sort of agenda. My agenda was to prove UFOs existed. So I began gathering data and evidence to support that. That's why I became a member or field investigator for MUFON. I wanted to gather the evidence for myself as to whether this phenomenon was real or not. But I admit, I had an agenda. I wanted to know. And I thought they were real. And, of course, I found evidence saying they are. But I also found evidence that they can be very dangerous and are not to be trusted. And that I wasn't expecting to find. But, yes, the different UFO researchers, and some simply, we collect data, tons of it. MUFON does. That's all it is a data collecting organization. It doesn't extrapolate and say what they did with this data. They don't massage the data. They don't try to interpret the data. They just gather it. So we have these huge, sort of warehouses, computerized, of course, of data, but we don't go further. And I think a lot of researchers are that way. They just keep wanting to prove UFOs exist, so they keep doing all these books on these different cases of UFOs. Well, UFOs exist. What they are, we don't know, but they're definitely there. Millions see them around the world. I mean, they're there. They affect us. They cause problems. They interact with people. They cause damage to property. They're real. It's no figment of anyone's imagination. But the next step is then to try to take that data and make something of it, to try to come up with some answers. And that's what I try to do. My answers may be incorrect, but they are a possible answer, and they are based heavily on the available data to date. Now, I know there are people who say they've trans-channeled 50,000-year-old aliens. I know that there's a medium now on the inner circle of the MUFON organization, which I totally disagree with, and she says she's channeling an alien. I'm sorry, I don't buy any of that. And why don't I? Because I don't see evidence to support it. I could say to you that I trans-channel Santa Claus and be absolutely convincing. But did I? Probably not, if you get my drift here. So, I mean, if you're trans-channeling this alien, why is he giving you any realistic information about what's going on and how to stop it or how to deal with it or whatever, or how to cope, or why you're really here or anything like that? They go on and on with all this information that the aliens give them, but none of it is anything other than, and I don't want to say New Age because I'm kind of a New Ageist myself in a way, but I don't know how else to put it, mystical, metaphysical. It's never solid evidence that anyone can then say, oh, I'll take what you just said and test it and see if it's true. We don't get that kind of stuff with these people who are channeling mentally other species. And my question is, why not? If there are aliens, can't they tell us how their ships work? Can't they tell us really why they're here? Can't they give us some answers that someone else can then test and corroborate? The scientific method says that whatever evidence you find ought to be repeatable, that other researchers ought to be able to use that and perform a test on it to prove if it's true or not, and that's what the scientific method is all about. But in the field of ufology, we seem to be deviating from gathering data now to becoming metaphysical in nature about the whole UFO phenomenon. And maybe they're right and maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But the evidence I have seems to suggest that they are not a positive influence. And I have a lot of evidence to prove that case.
Hey, Robbie, yeah, I really appreciate, your viewpoint on this, because I think maybe you're right. Maybe some of them are ignoring what the aspects of it that, maybe people don't want to hear. And so I think it's important research.
They simply haven't drawn any firm conclusions from it all. You can gather data forever and lose sight of the fact that it's just data that's supposed to provide you with answers. But a lot of us are so busy trying to prove UFOs are real, maybe when what we should be doing is trying to figure out why they're here.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So you've obviously, are a prolific writer. You're putting out a lot of books. What's on the horizon for you? What are you working on right now?
Well, I just finished last week a stint in L.A. doing a shoot for a new show on Discovery Channel as an on-camera expert. I'm really proud of that fact because they contacted me. I didn't contact them and ask. And the show is tentatively titled Restored. It won't be on this season, but it'll be on the next one. It'll be 8 episodes. And it's pretty scientific in its shape and origin. And it was a real pleasure to do that. And now I have to concentrate on getting my book on quantum immortality finished. And I'm also working on a sci-fi book with a fellow from the State Department. And we're getting that wrapped up now, too. So, and then I get to move on more towards my UFO stuff. When you're a writer, you have to write what the public wants, and so you do. But in between times, I write what I want, and that's stuff about UFOs and time travel, that sort of thing.
Sure. And just for the listener, where can they find your work, your website, and wherever else they can find your books and the work?
Well, the only website I really keep is robshelsky.blogspot.com. robshelsky.blogspot.com. It's pretty easy, really. But honestly, if you want to know more about me, just go to Amazon, Kindle, print books are all there. You can find all my stuff there. There's like 5 pages of it. So just go to Kindle and type in Shelsky, and it'll all come up for you.
Great. Well, hey, Rob, it's a pleasure once again. Thank you for joining me once again on the show. Another great discussion, and look forward to any of the new work you have coming out. Maybe once again we can talk a ways down the road.
Oh, I would enjoy it. You always ask the right questions in the sense that they're penetrating questions, and I like that in a host. I don't like the fluff that I sometimes get, but you always ask the hard question.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and again, I'm not doing it to just for the sake of asking, but I do think that it helps with the discussion, helps enrich the discussion, and I think the research you've done is very interesting and important research. And again, I really did enjoy the discussion, and I think you do great work. I really appreciate you once again coming back on the show and talking with me and hanging out with me.
Well, thank you so much, and I think it was an honor to be on your show, and I appreciate the opportunity very much.
All right, Rob. Well, hey, you have a great night, and once again, we'll be looking down the road for any of your new work.
Wow, it was great to have Rob back on the show, and this time talking about and shedding new light on the UFO subject that other UFO researchers and authors who've been on the show have not covered. And certainly gives me pause that if I happen to see one of these UFOs in the sky, maybe not to wait around to see what it's going to do. So it was great to have him on the show and covering that side of things. And make sure you don't miss next episode. This is an amazing guest, and I'm actually amazed that he's actually agreed to join me on the show. And it is none other than the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, Mr. Stephen Bassett. Mr. Bassett is one of the first ever UFO lobbyists in D.C., and that's what his organization does. They are lobbying for UFO disclosure with Congress and other power brokers there in the D.C. area. It's amazing to have him on the show. He's been he's spoken at so many different UFO conferences, has spoken all around the world, and he is a huge proponent for the UFO disclosure movement. So great to have him going to be joining me on the show. Don't miss that next episode. It's going to be great. And, once again, thank you so much for supporting the show. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward so much to that next episode. Have a great night, everybody.